Depending on your interpretation, you could make the case that Cardinals team president Bill DeWitt III essentially laughed in the faces of Cardinals fans who are expressing their frustration over the team's struggles. We'll discuss his comments and our reaction to them coming up on B-Schaeff Daily. What's going on, everyone, and welcome in to this edition of B-Schaeff Daily. Brenden Schaeffer here with you. It is Thursday, May 16th, 2024. Cardinals in the midst of an off day after their series win over the Angels. They dropped Game 3, couldn't get the sweep, but they got the series win. They've won 3 of their last 4, technically 3 of their last 11 as well, but who's counting? Nevertheless, off day on Thursday for the Cardinals, and they will return home to take on the Boston Red Sox and Tyler O'Neill beginning on Friday night at Busch. Gibby on the mound for that one, but not a lot of baseball-specific talk going on tonight on B-Schaeff Daily, just because there's no new game to break down. If you want to hear my thoughts on that last game against the Angels and the state of the Cardinals in general following it, you can scroll back on your podcast feed to episode number 564, or just back a couple of YouTube videos to find the full-length B-Schaeff Daily podcast. I put all the B-Schaeff Daily podcasts in a playlist on YouTube, by the way, so that if there are some videos on the channel that you're like, is that a B-Schaeff Daily? It's only going to be a B-Schaeff Daily if it's in the B-Schaeff Daily podcast playlist. So that's just a little hat tip. And by the way, something new that I want to mention that I keep forgetting to mention until the end of these podcasts recently, the YouTube memberships are live for the channel. And signing up, as a handful of folks have already done in the first couple of days that I've offered it, will give you several perks, including loyalty badges where your comments will look real special on the channel. You'll get some extra photo and status updates from when I go to Busch Stadium, member shout-outs in videos, connecting on social media, and occasionally some member-only access videos as well. Check that out in the link at the very bottom of the description if you're interested in supporting me and my work here on the channel in a new way and on a new level. I keep saying it 40 minutes in, and I know some people probably don't listen all the way through, so I just wanted to mention that off the top. But no specific baseball stuff to break down tonight. We are going to break down something that's been in the news for a number of days now, and the Cardinal off day is the perfect time for me to get to it. I'm talking about the recent comments made by Bill DeWitt III, who is, of course, the Cardinals team president and the son of the club's principal owner and chairman, Bill DeWitt Jr. These comments were recently made on a podcast with Martin Kilcoyne, who is the sports director for Fox 2 and has been involved in St. Louis radio for a long, long time. I love Martin. I have a lot of respect for Martin, having worked with him previously in local sports radio, and he does a great job. One of the best interviewers that you'll see locally here in town, because he's got relationships with everybody, and as a result of that, is able to ask the difficult questions without maybe coming off in a way that's going to upset somebody. He does it in a very tactful way, and got this interview with Bill DeWitt III for his podcast on the Scoops with Danny Mac website, I believe is where that's hosted. And I know he posts to Charlie Marlowe's YouTube channel as well. You can find the full interview between Martin and Bill DeWitt III on Charlie's YouTube channel. I know you guys are following him over there as well as me. He partners with me on Low Hanging Fruit, the podcast that we post weekly to his channel over on YouTube. But it seemed like a great time for Martin or somebody like Martin to interview Bill DeWitt III, because that recent article came out in the Riverfront Times that basically said, hey, the Cardinals are going to ask for $500 million here before long for stadium renovations, and went into detail about the history of financing Busch Stadium and sports stadiums in general and the economic impact. And there's a lot at play going on with a potential ask of public money, especially in a time period where the Chiefs and Royals just tried and failed to do something similar on the other side of the state. I'm not going to play too much about that in this podcast, because I get the feeling if I try to get too in-depth with it and try to tackle too many topics at once, I'll end up going over an hour, and I really don't want to do that on a Cardinal off day. This should be a lighter day for me, so we're going to try to keep the podcast to normal length tonight if at all possible. But what I will say about that topic, and again, I recommend you go to scoopswithdannymac.com or go to Charlie Marlowe's YouTube channel to view the entire interview or listen to the entire interview with Bill DeWitt III. But as it pertains to that Riverfront Times article, he basically said it was premature for that to even come out in the first place because the Cardinals are not imminently asking for the funding, which is basically what I sort of broke down when I talked about that topic in a video a number of weeks ago on another recent Cardinal off day. The businessy stuff tends to get saved for the Cardinal off days here on B-Schaeff Daily because we do. We cover every single Cardinal game, and it doesn't leave a lot of time in the day for other topics like this unless the team isn't playing that day, which is why, A, you should subscribe to the YouTube channel by clicking the red button in the lower right-hand corner of your screen. We're covering the Cardinals in a way that few are out there in the podcast form. So appreciate you guys for sticking with the channel and the daily podcast. If you're a Cardinal fan and you're listening to the way that we evaluate and break down this season as the Cardinals go. And it's why, B, we're doing this topic tonight, finally breaking down these Bill DeWitt III comments, because there were some interesting ones to come out of it. Again, if you want to listen to it for the context on the stadium ask and how they're really not ready for that, I think there was an element of this that may still be pending if the Cardinals, who have been pushing really hard behind the scenes for legalized sports betting in Missouri, that could very clearly have a lot to do with the way that the Cardinals could look to finance some of the renovations, if not all of the renovations, if that should come to pass. And the Cardinals have been working feverishly behind the scenes on getting this done. Like, they have been lobbying heavily, along with other pro teams in the state, to get this thing through. I think it would make for an obvious revenue stream additional to the ones the Cardinals already have going, and could be a scenario that kind of everybody goes home happy with. If the Cardinals have a sports book at Ballpark Village or Busch Stadium or whatever it is, that could honestly probably be a way that they could help fund some of the renovations that they believe Busch Stadium, which is approaching quickly its 20th year, was opened in 2006. So you're talking about year 19, season number 19 this year in 2024. That could be a scenario that if they find a way to pass legalized sports betting in Missouri, which, believe me, I would love, because I am a feverish college football fantasy betting fanatic. I enjoy it, college football, NFL. I would love to see that in the fall time without having to go over to the state of Illinois or do it through some unsavory means. So that's something that I would personally support, and the Cardinals are gung-ho about it. And so I honestly think that the Cardinals just weren't ready for that to come out yet. They weren't eager to kind of touch on that because they don't have a plan cemented. Martin did ask, when do you think you will have a plan? And basically he said, within the next year or so, the Cardinals do think they'll be gearing up to, whatever form it takes, present a plan on what they're looking for, how they're looking to get it done. But again, if there's a ballot initiative in November, and even off the top of my head, I don't know if they got the petition done and the signatures they needed to get it on the ballot in this November election cycle, but maybe that is going to end up being a pretty relevant aspect of what the timeline on a Busch Stadium renovation plan and ask of the public could end up being. But that was a topic, generally speaking, not specific to the sports betting angle, but the stadium renovation stuff was a topic that Martin got into more depth with Bill DeWitt III on later on in the podcast. But I want to focus on something that happened toward the beginning of the interview, as Bill DeWitt III was asked about the fan frustration, the level of frustration from Cardinals fans who last year were asked for patience by John Mozeliak, and that patience didn't really result in anything profitable for the St. Louis Cardinals fans. The team finished with a brutal 71-91 record. They didn't get the end-of-season press conference, which, again, I talk about all the time. I don't know if people care about it, but I just think it is a sign of an ownership, or even like specific to the front office, that might be a little out of touch with the fans and the expectations of what is the standard that they're held to, right? The front office should be held to a standard of, hey, we asked you to be patient, and then we should be human here and recognize that when it doesn't pan out, you guys are probably pissed, and you should be. And you're pissed at us, and you should be, because we told you it was going to be one thing, and we kind of led you astray. We kind of sold you a bill of goods. And in the performance business, like Major League Baseball is a performance-based business, so it's not that it's a direct lie. Like John Mozeliak didn't say, we're going to be great, we promise, and then they're not, and they say, well, we got you, haha. No, it's like they tried to do their jobs to the best of their ability, and they failed. They didn't have a successful season in 2023. It's not because they didn't want to, and as much as fans might not agree with this, it's not because they did it on purpose and they wanted to be able to sit in their suites and look down at all the peasants and laugh at Cardinals fans and say, haha, they thought we were going to be good and we don't care. Like, that's not what's happening behind the scenes. I think even if you don't agree with the way that the Cardinals organization is being run, whether it's ownership, whether it's front office, whether it's coaching staff, field manager, what have you, players and their level of investment, the guys, they all care. They are doing what they can to try and turn this around. It hasn't happened, and caring about it is not enough to manifest it and make it so. So you don't get credit for that necessarily, but I do think that there are some people who have made the claim, I've seen it, that the Cardinals organization and ownership and the front office, they don't care the way that the fans care. And I do think they care because this is more than their fandom. It's their livelihood and it's their jobs. It's their day-to-day. So I do think there's a lot invested in that emotionally. And yeah, at the end of the day, they do get to get their paycheck, whether they win or lose or draw or whatever. But I do think that there's maybe a misconception about the level of caring that goes on at the upper levels of the Cardinal organization. But that being said, fans that would maybe make those claims, and then you get a chance to listen to the comments from Bill DeWitt III, which I think came off a little bit callous to me in the way that he responded to the notion of fan frustration. We're going to play some of the comments for you from the podcast with Martin Kilcoyne. Again, shout out to scoopswithdannymac.com, where Martin hosts this podcast. I guess I should know the name of the podcast. Yeah, what does Martin call the damn thing? Oh, I believe it's the Kilcoyne Conversation. The Kilcoyne Conversation is the name of Martin's podcast, which he's been doing for a number of years, and again, does a great job. But I want to play the segments of this podcast and the section of the podcast that touches on Martin asking about the fan frustration, because it's just a couple minutes after that where Bill DeWitt, I think, makes a misstep and is callous in the way he responds to one of these questions. So I'll play this for a little bit and we'll react to it. Here's Martin Kilcoyne interviewing Cardinals team president Bill DeWitt III, courtesy of the Kilcoyne Conversation podcast.
I feel like the White Sox series certainly amplified it because they're having a rough year. You guys lose 2 of 3. The angst, the frustration, it's been building, I think. We went through last year with the last place finish, but what's your sense of fan frustration as we sit here now?
Oh, it's definitely high. I mean, we're in last place in the Central. We all believe, and I think even our fans believe, that this is a better team than this. When you just look at it, there's some bright spots on the team. I mean, Mason Wynn, who we were all like, oh, God, he's the key. If he can hit 250, play great D, we'll be fine. Well, I mean, he's done great, and then some other guys have tailed off. And I think the approach to our offseason pitching issues, which were the key problem last year, largely have worked out. I like our bullpen, so there's some positives there. It's just, early on, a lot of the guys aren't hitting at the same time. And, we've lost some close games and weird games. So I remain optimistic but concerned. I think that wouldn't be fair to say it's not, I don't think it's panic button right now, but it's like, come on, guys, this is a bit, we're better than this, and we should be able to climb into this race.
Okay, so I don't think anything said there by Bill DeWitt III is something people should have a problem with. I think he was pretty candid. Yes, he is optimistic, I think, relative to where a lot of Cardinals fans are about this team right now, making the comment that I think even our fan base feels like this team should be in a better spot. And this is why earlier today on the KTGR Big Show with Andy Humphrey and Brenden Schaeffer on KTGR.com, airs weekdays from 4 to 6 in mid-Missouri over the radio airwaves and online worldwide at KTGR.com. We talked about the notion of look at the stats, and I think I touched on this on B-Schaeff Daily last night too. The stats, the Cardinals rank, rotation ERA, 25th, bullpen ERA, middle of the pack in Major League Baseball. Offensively, they're last in batting average with runners in scoring position. They are 24th in batting average overall. They are 27th in OPS. Like, I could go on. These are the numbers. And if you add up those key elements of a ball club and say, hey, what do you think that team's record is? You probably would say, well, it's probably 18 and 25. It's below 500 by a good clip, and that's where the Cardinals are at right now. So the stats kind of do match up with what the Cardinals have been in terms of their record. They are who we thought they were, is sort of the way that I would frame it. But I think what Bill DeWitt III is referring to is like, yeah, before the season, I didn't think the offense would be last in RISP, 27th in OPS, 25th in batting average, et cetera, et cetera. Thought it would be a decent offense. Maybe not elite, but solid enough. Like Nolan Gorman completely falling off a cliff is not something, well, maybe you saw it coming because you said, look, his swing is susceptible to that. And hey, that's not something that's news to me or probably many Cardinals fans, because in the offseason when the conversations were happening, hey, they should trade a position player to get some elite, young, controllable starting pitching, I said, look, Gorman would be the guy that I would move, not a Brendan Donovan, because I would try to capitalize on the notion of Gorman could be this untapped resource of 35, 40 home run power. And I just don't know if you got the back injuries going on and just different elements of the holes in his swing throughout the course of his couple of years, where he's been easily an above-average big league run producer and offensive talent. But can you reasonably expect Nolan Gorman to put together, with that makeup that he possesses, a 6-month full season where he does all the great things and minimizes the slumps and the bad things to turn into an all-star perennial MVP caliber player? Like, is that something that's in his future? And I was skeptical about it. There's still time to turn it around because he's a young player. But right now you're looking at it going, well, either the Cardinals missed another window on selling a guy when he was at his height of value, or we just maybe had a misunderstanding of what his value was across the league. And it may have been the case that the rest of the league said, yeah, we see kind of the issues with Nolan Gorman that you might see, even though he's a 23-year-old player with this type of home run production and this type of OPS and et cetera, et cetera. There's also a world in which the rest of the league may not have valued him the way that we would in an MLB The Show franchise, where, hey, he's a 85 overall. That's a real talent. Like, you can flip that for something if you just do the math of his age and his overall potential and his overall stats. In a video game, that might work. In real-life baseball, it maybe didn't. And it could have been that. It could have been more likely that the Cardinals just never were even willing to consider trading Nolan Gorman because he is that young, controllable power that swings it from the left side, and those that's a rarity in baseball today. And it's something that if you have on the cheap and controllable for a number of years, you want to maintain it and you want to just enjoy and reap the benefits of it. But also, how many times have we had the conversation where the Cardinals have a guy that they think is going to be the next and ends up maybe falling short of those expectations, and there would have been a moment in time to sell high and capitalize on what the perception of that player is, and the Cardinals miss the boat on that over and over and over again over the course of the last 5, 7, 10 years, whatever it's been. That's sort of been the trend line. But my point in delving into all of this is to say that even if you expected, okay, Gorman may not be the one that was promised, and, you know, Jordan Walker's going to have more growing pains, and Brendan Donovan's going to downward trend compared to what he's been, and Lars Nootbaar's not going to ascend the way that we thought. In fact, he's going to go the opposite direction for a little while. All of these guys, it's temporary because they've played 6 weeks of baseball or whatever it's been, and they could come out of it and be great for the next 6 weeks. We don't know. But with what they've been so far, and that doesn't even begin to touch on Arenado and Goldschmidt, who have been below their expectations as well this season, and then Wilson Contreras getting hurt. Like, with all of those factors playing out the way that they've played out, yeah, it's not crazy to think the Cardinals would have the offense that they have. I just don't think reasonably very many people, and you're going to be able to say it in a YouTube comment that, yeah, I called it. No, that's fine. You can say you did. There's no way that people thought legitimately, if you would have been asked line by line for the Cardinal offense, what's this guy's OPS going to be? What's this guy's going to be? You wouldn't have had across the board numbers this low, probably for very few of them. And so that's what I think Bill DeWitt III means when he says that. And I actually agree with him on that front. People did think it would be a better season than this. They weren't over the moon about it, by the way. Like, when I did the preseason win total polls on Twitter last year, you guys were saying 90 wins. Like, that's, and I know I'm only talking to 800, 1,000 of you that vote in those polls every year, but I do them for a reason, because I don't want people to be able to go back and say, well, I knew this all along would be a 91-loss season. No, you didn't. You didn't, because if you did, and enough of you did, you wouldn't have all voted over 90.5 wins a year ago when I did the polls right before the season began. This year, people were a little bit more in check with their expectations. I think it landed right around 82.5, 83.5 before people said majority under that win total rather than over is the way that I designed those polls to be. So I think Bill DeWitt III has a point. People thought the team would be better than it is. I think largely people thought, Cardinals fans, even the pessimistic ones, thought this team might strain to get to 500. That's not good enough to make the playoffs, and so that's why I'm concerned. I don't think they did enough and expressed the level of urgency necessary to truly fix the roster, which is a backwards roster, by the way. Like, you can sort of gaslight us into every little microtransaction being not that big of a deal, but when you add them all up, it's like it doesn't make sense what the Cardinal roster is. Like, Brandon Crawford's role doesn't really make sense. Was it an easy one to do because he wanted to keep playing, because his kids wanted to see him play, and so he was just willing to take a deal? If you're going to pay him $2 million, why wouldn't you take the deal at the tail end of your career? Like, yeah, it was probably easy for John Mozeliak to do, just like it was easy to sign Lance Lynn because, you know, he's been a Cardinal before and you had had his phone number already, right? Sonny Gray was an easy enough one, but even that one took until by the time John Mozeliak called him, he said, am I too late? Like that's the opening line, as said by Sonny Gray himself during the winter meetings, or pardon me, not winter meetings, but winter warm up in January. And it's like, were the Cardinals almost going to miss out on Sonny Gray too? Like that's kind of crazy. We were tabbing that as the obvious pick for the Cardinals in like September, October, before free agency even opened up. And it took till, mid to late November before the Cardinals even really checked in. Almost missed the boat on that. So like these moves, it's almost, there is and I said I wasn't going to get too much into baseball talk today, but I've been seeing some good comments on Twitter from some people, which, how often do I tell you that? No, I just tease. But I've been seeing some good comments of people saying, and identifying that the Cardinals are just very, very reluctant to make moves and to make transactions. It's almost as a last resort to even call up a Chris Roycroft or something because you realize you have to swap guys out of the bullpen. They are reluctant. They still don't have a fifth starter on their roster right now, and they're not giving Matthew Liberatore to this point. Maybe that changes if they slot him in and keep him in on Sunday and let him throw 70 pitches and build him up and actually see that through instead of just herky-jerky every week or every other week with Matt Liberatore. Like they don't make moves right now that are making a ton of sense. I could point to Crawford. I could point to how they're handling Liberatore. I could point to the construction of the bench when they signed Matt Carpenter. And look, Carpenter's had a nice start to the season, but everybody's like, yeah, but don't you have like Alec Burleson already kind of does that, and he's younger, so there might be the perception of more upside, and Burley's been really good. But okay, you got that on your bench. And then Crawford specifically, even if he doesn't have a lot of upside, it's even kind of worse that he's a left-handed bat instead of a righty to be able to be used in that regard off the bench. Like just a lot of things that you look at and say, if you stand back and look at it from a helicopter view, does this roster really make a ton of sense? And the answer is really no, it doesn't in many ways. I would say in the defense of the organization, roster is going to look a lot better when guys are performing to career norms. And when everybody's not performing to career norms, it's going to look like a lesser roster because its performing is one. And a lesser roster is a roster that the puzzle pieces don't fit as well and make sense as well because when guys aren't hitting, well, who cares what their role is? They just, they're stinking. They're not playing well. And that tends to be the focus. So I understand all of those things, but I spent 8 minutes here, as I tend to do, breaking down one element of a comment by DeWitt III that I didn't even disagree with, but I just wanted to kind of contextualize. He said a lot of the fans it feels like they're, the understanding of the idea that the Cardinals should be better than they've been. They expected it to be better. They think the club still is better, and that's where I'm not sure if a lot of you guys listening out there would agree with me that you still think the Cardinals are better than they are, or if they are what you thought they were, and that's just kind of where they're at. The statistics of the team through 6-7 weeks is representative of a bottom 10 team, and they've got a record that's straddling that line of being a bottom 10 team. I don't know exactly where they fall at this point, but there's a couple teams in the NL that are worse than them, probably a couple in the American League. They're probably bottom 10 with the record that they have as of right now. I'm not going to go through the teams in this moment and look at it, but it's not been great. That being said, I think the amount of accountability or the amount of acknowledgement of the frustrations of fans that DeWitt III gave in the comments that we've played so far is actually fair. Because I don't expect the team president to go, yeah, we do stink. And what's that guy in right field doing? Why isn't Carlson catching the ball when it's like, he's not going to say that. So the level to which I could expect a team president to kind of say, hey, it hasn't been good enough and we know that we've got to be better. And I understand the fans are frustrated. I thought he gave that in that comment, but we'll continue to listen as Martin asks more questions and get to really the meat of what we're talking about and the comments that I think are going to rankle some people.
Are you guys always sort of balancing, hey, we have had a great run. If you point to all the moments in the last 20 years, there's a lot of winning that took place, but a lot of fans are like, well, I don't care about that. I care about tonight. I care about tomorrow. How do you balance that as an organization that loves its past, that celebrates it, and yet has to deliver today, tomorrow?
I think it's just the reality of pro sports that it's what have you done for me lately for the most part. I mean, if you look at any given season, that's the most important one. Not last season, not next season. It's this season is the most important season right now. And so if you're not in a great competitive situation, you're going to hear it. And I don't have any problem with that. I try not to, look at all of it, but I try to be aware of it, so, and we all are. So it's, no fun when you're, getting mostly negative comments or you should have done this or this is what you should do rather than, hey, I love how you're doing your job. We'd much prefer that. And when the team wins, even the process on the business side gets easier with selling tickets and driving enthusiasm and promotional responses and all kinds of stuff like that. But we are where we are, and we're going to make the best of it and get this thing turned around.
So even there, you hear from Bill DeWitt III. He basically says, look, I get it. I understand when we're going to get the criticism because of a lack of performance, and that's the way it ought to be. He's got no problem with that. He understands it. Said, he personally prefers it when people are saying nice things about it, but who doesn't, right? It doesn't even matter what we're talking about, professional, personal, anything. I think we're all that way. And when you are the team president and the son of the owner, you're in a position where you're going to catch some of the shrapnel, some of the heat when things aren't going well. And that comes from a passionate fan base that simply wants things to go well. They're not saying it for their health. They're not saying it because they're your auditor or something. They love the St. Louis Cardinals, and they want to see the Cardinals do well. It means a lot to those people. So that's why those criticisms are levied, and they're totally fair, right? So far, I'm with you, Bill DeWitt III. I'm with everything he said so far, to be honest with you. You could nitpick a little bit here and there, but so far from what we've played, I am on board entirely. But let's keep going.
From last year's last place finish, it seems though ticket sales coming into this year were still relatively good. Was that the same corporate-wise, too? Was there much of a drop-off?
There was definitely a drop-off. I think that, you start to realize, really who your hardcore, loyal fans are.
Okay, so here we go. Here's the first little tinge of, what is he saying? What's he talking about, hardcore, loyal? And I, even seeing some of this as I looked on Charlie Marlowe's YouTube channel, like, did he just say I'm not loyal? Some of your comments out there, I think, are spot on. It's like, okay, that's like a little bit of a thinly veiled dig at Cardinals fans who are making the decision not to spend money for a product that is lackluster, right? It's almost as though it's the onus is on the fans to continue spending the money regardless of the product being put on the field. It's just this expectation. It's like an implied expectation almost. And look, we haven't even really gotten to the comments that I think were the most damning, that were the most callous and the most, upsetting, disappointing to hear from the team president in a stretch like this where the team isn't performing. But even that little tinge there of, and he'll go on to explain. I'm gonna rewind it and let you hear the context again since I did interrupt it. But even that is a little bit like, okay, where are you going with this? Where are you going with this? Okay, you really find out who your hardcore loyal fans are. Well, yeah, but the hardcore loyal fans too might just not want to put up with the product being put on the field and being asked to be patient, and then their patience not be rewarded, and then you sort of sweep it under the rug and be like, well, that was a one-off and we had some injuries, so we didn't win this year. But we'll fix it for next year and, buy those tickets. Like, okay, let's dive into this a little bit deeper. I'll rewind it 10 seconds or so that you can hear the beginning of that comment in context again, and we'll kind of continue letting him explain his thoughts. This was to a question from Martin Kilcoyne about ticket sales and whether corporate-wise or in general ticket sales took a dip after the troubling 2023. And DeWitt III's credit, he said, no, there was a dip, but then he kind of goes on to explain.
I think that, you start to realize, really who your hardcore, loyal fans are, and even become even more appreciative of that support when the team isn't playing well.
And so it was, again, and I put it in context, it was still complimentary of, hey, the hardcore fans, that's who you really can appreciate. When the team's not playing well, they still show out for you. Okay, I just don't know about obligation that Cardinals fans might have to do that. But in fairness to Bill DeWitt III, I stopped the comment a little bit prematurely. He was still being complimentary to an extent at that point, but we're going to keep going.
But, I think just the casual fans that are looking for that experience just based on performance on the field, they're the ones that maybe are on a wait-and-see basis.
That's another interesting part of this, though. He equates casual fans to the ones who only care about seeing the product on the field thrive. It's very, like, to this point already, I would say is where I'd stop you and go, well, now, wait a minute. It's almost could you make an argument that it's almost the opposite of what he is laying out? If you're a casual fan, are you really going to discern and delineate between whether the team, like who's pitching that night when you decide to buy tickets to a game, or whether the Cardinals have a passable batting average with runners in scoring position over the last 14 days before you decide to go down to Busch Stadium? No, you're probably going with your family or with your buddies, and if you're a casual fan, you may not be as locked in on what the final score is, right? You're going to drink a few beers. You're gonna have that heinous hot dog slinger thing that has eggs on it that I'm never going to ingest so long as I live. I saw it up close and personal, and I don't think I want anything to do with it. But my point is, I don't think you're necessarily, as a casual fan, making those determinations. Maybe the wait and see element of is true. Like if the team's playing well, even as a casual fan, you're definitely more inclined to want to go down there and be part of the action because it's going to be a bigger crowd. It's going to be more fun, more entertaining, more excitement, more going on. So that's totally fair. But the part of that equation that's interesting is like the hardcore loyal fans almost are, you just take that for granted regardless of performance, is to me the premise being established there by Bill DeWitt III in those comments. Let me know if you disagree with it, but that's sort of the side of it that I come down on. And again, we are still not the part of this, and I know we're 30 minutes in, and if somebody in the comments wants to say, hey, here's where he starts playing the comments, if you don't want to watch the whole video, that's fine. But I think the context of all of this is so important. It's why I do the daily podcast. It's why I think it's important to do, and it's why I hope you subscribe, by the way. Red button in the lower right-hand corner of the channel. But let's go ahead, because there is a part where he basically, I said it, I teased it at the beginning, and I'm not going to leave without talking about it, I think kind of laughed in the face of Cardinals fans, and that's coming up momentarily.
The thing I chuckle about is when I see sometimes comments, we got to, not show up to send a message that this isn't acceptable to the owners.
That's the one I was getting to. That's the one that I think we focus the most on here. Because he is kind of laughing there, isn't he? I mean, that's, all right, so what's the premise? We're going to back this up a little bit. This is the comment we've been waiting for. Again, we're airing this from Martin Kilcoyne's podcast, The Kilcoyne Conversation, aired on scoopswithdannymac.com, in which Cardinals team president and the son of the owner, Bill DeWitt Jr., makes these comments. And he basically says he sort of chuckles at the notion that fans would say, we're going to send a message by not showing up. And in a moment, I'm going to rewind it and you'll hear it again. He's going to say that those comments are illogical when he sees them. We'll play the full thing here.
The thing I chuckle about is when I see sometimes comments, we got to, not show up to send a message that this isn't acceptable to the owners. I find that one somewhat illogical reasoning because, we just turn this revenue machine into a payroll machine. I mean, that's what this is, this business. I mean, we try to drive as much revenue as we can, and then it gets put on the field for the most part. We have to obviously put on all sorts of other expenses. We've talked about the stadium earlier and all kinds of other things. But you know what I'm getting at is we take those, we try to, and it, I'll just give you another way of saying the same thing. If you look at the revenue rankings,
I want to stop it before he even gets into that because I feel like the longer the answer, the more you lose sight of what was said at the beginning of it. The longer you talk, the more it kind of softens the blow of what he said. And I do think what he said is problematic, and it demonstrates a fundamental misunderstanding of the way this works. We turn the revenue machine into a payroll machine, and that's how this business is run. Okay, fine. I get it. Like, if there's not the revenue to spend more on payroll, you can't spend as much on payroll. If your focus is the profit margin, I totally agree. That's just business 101. But isn't there like an idealism element to this if you're a Cardinals fan that's like they want to win and that can be a priority too, and maybe sometimes at the expense of profit margins? And look, we already know the longstanding held opinion of Bill DeWitt Jr., which is that this isn't a profitable business, right? Ownership of a major sports team like the St. Louis Cardinals is not a profitable endeavor, which is laughable, right? We don't have the public numbers because it's a private company, but I see all of the buildings that they keep putting together and the nice restaurants and I don't know. I'm not going to buy that this is not a profitable if and when they ever decide to sell the team, which in this same podcast, Bill DeWitt III said that they're in it for the long haul, and his dad, even at age 82, is in great health. And, the unspoken part of that is even if at some point he is not, you figure Bill DeWitt III stands to kind of transfer of power, and he would end up stepping in as the chairman and the principal owner that would ultimately be transferred at some point in time. Hopefully that's a long, long time from now. And look, there's some nasty things that I think are said sometimes about Bill DeWitt Jr., but I hope he, prospers for as long as possible. That would be great. But I think the reality of it is, like, this guy, Bill DeWitt III, his son, is ultimately going to be in that owner's chair at some point. That's sort of the way that this is going to break down. And to hear those comments from him of like, well, it's a revenue machine, that gets turned into a payroll machine, and that's the way that it works. And it's laughable, it's illogical that the fans say, well, we're going to not show up to send a message that we don't appreciate the product that's being put out. For the guy that's going to be running this team as the owner of it, he's running the team on the business side already. He's the team president. But for Bill DeWitt III and the role that he's in, to say it's illogical that fans would want to, if you say the word boycott, or would want to just stay away because they're displeased with the way the organization is being run, boy, that just demonstrates a level of haughtiness that should be concerning to me. And the thing that I think is important to remember with this is that Bill DeWitt III is the team president. He runs the business operation. He's not involved in the baseball operation. That's John Mozeliak's jurisdiction. But John Mozeliak is so, beloved and trusted and ingrained with the DeWitt family. He is part of the family, right? Like, he's not. Mo is going to get to leave on his terms. Now, 2 bad seasons in a row could expedite that, and I still maintain that it's incumbent upon John Mozeliak, if this season ends up as a losing year, to step aside at the end of this year at the latest. I know that he is supposed to make it through the contract at the end of 2025. I personally, especially if they want to start firing a manager or doing different things, that tells me that, look, you've made enough bad decisions at the end of your tenure here. Great legacy. You did a lot of wonderful things. I'm not trying to take that away from you, but the game is maybe passed this group by in a way that I think should be reflected by change in the front office. If this season ends up as a loser, like last year's was, that becomes just an undeniable trend that I think there should be some level of a reaction to, a response to, on a somewhat urgent level by ownership to say, look, we love this front office. We love the guys that are working for us, but they're not producing anymore. And it may be time to make some changes as a result of that. Whether, and again, I just don't see a world in which they're going to fire John Mozeliak. And I understand he's been long valued and has done some amazing, amazing things for the organization and has leveled the organization up over the past 20 years in ways that we probably don't see or fully recognize. But also, I think on the baseball side of it now, there are elements that he is holding them back if he is unable to kind of meet the need of forward-thinking transactions and forward-thinking moves and setting up the Cardinals where the puzzle all fits together. The puzzle just hasn't fit together the last couple of years, and even if they turn it around now, you might be able to kind of shoo those concerns away and say, well, why did it matter that they had, Brandon Crawford not really doing a whole lot as the last man on the roster? Why did it matter that they, had some time where they couldn't make a decision on who should be the fifth starter, and they jerked around a 24-year-old pitching prospect or a young pitcher in his major league career? If they win 87 games and they make the playoffs, you can probably brush all of that aside. But last year they didn't. They lost 91, and so I think it's fair to look back and go, yeah, they did waste a lot of time on a Taylor Motter, didn't they? Like, they did. There are things that happened that by the time the season was at its end, you go, well, play Taylor Motter every game and bat him leadoff. It just doesn't matter because they've blown it so bad to this point that you might as well just, he's a nice enough guy, keep him around. But, like, if you're talking about it being a competitive venture and wanting to just gain an edge in every area, you can't possibly argue to me that that's what the Cardinals have successfully done with their major league roster over the past 2 years. You just can't. They just have not. They make moves that are like, well, you can't really outwardly criticize them because, yeah, I guess it could work out, and maybe then it does. And some of them are great. Kyle Gibson, I think, was a really great signing that at the time I thought was an average signing, was a solid signing that I understood their impetus for. They wanted some veteran leadership and a guy who could get you innings, and they didn't get innings last year, so it's understandable to want them. But Kyle Gibson has even exceeded my expectations, and I was somebody that I think was very accepting and amenable to the Kyle Gibson signing by the Cardinals. I got it, and then it's even been better to this point than I would have envisioned or predicted. So some of the moves that are made actually do work out, and they end up being really savvy and really sound. But it seems like there's a limited scope with this front office and John Mozeliak to the types of moves that they are willing to make. Does the guy already live within a 100-mile radius of Busch Stadium, or is he somewhat predisposed somehow to being a Cardinal because he's been one before, or he knows guys on the team, or he's whatever it is. We used to scout him, and so we thought maybe we'd have him if we drafted him, but so we already kind of knew a little bit about him. Like there seems to be a checklist that you have to pass to even be considered by the Cardinals. And it's not like this Cardinals thing is as exclusive as it used to be in terms of, hey, it's the place to be. Everybody's clamoring to get there, and we're only going to accept certain guys. Nothing on St. Louis, but you're in the Midwest of the United States. You're not in California. You're not in Florida. You're not in a big city like Chicago or New York or Boston. Like, you're not in Philly. You're not in some of those cultural centers on the coast, which for some people that matters, right? Especially people that make a lot of money and they play big league baseball, and so they kind of can have their luxury choices that you make in life. I'm perfectly happy to be living in a St. Louis suburb. I love my life. But, for some people, that's an impediment that the Cardinals would have to overcome by just being so much better and above and beyond the other organizations so that free agents would be compelled to want to come here. If the dollars are equal, they still might pick St. Louis over another destination. It just doesn't seem like really the Cardinals in too many regards, and they would push back on this, and they have, but I'm saying what I'm saying because I don't agree with their take on it at all times. I just think that there is some element of the shine is off a little bit of this organization with the trend of the way things have gone. And if you look at some of the moves that are made, it's like they make the lowest common denominator move because it was the one they had to make. Like, imagine if they didn't sign Wilson Contreras, but they needed a catcher and they didn't believe in the time at Ivan Herrera. What would they have done? Because they balked at the asking price for a Sean Murphy trade, and I'm understanding of it. Although now you would look at it and go, well, I don't know, Brendan Donovan, Lars Nootbaar, what are these guys? Now, 6 weeks from now, I think we're going to look at Brendan Donovan and Lars Nootbaar and still view them as part of this team's core. But it was just a situation for the Cardinals when it came to that catcher need when Yadi was retiring that I think, like, rather than, again, on a video game, you can just go out and say, all right, who's the next catcher free agent on the list? I'm going to click a button and offer him a contract through my video game and see if he picks to sign with me in this electronic world that I've built for myself. I'm simulating all of these moves. Real life is not simulated, and a baseball front office has to operate in real life. And sometimes I just wonder, like, do they have the connections? Do they have the respect of the league and the players and the agents to be able to sign anybody that even if they don't have a personal relationship with that player already predisposed to joining the Cardinals? Can they sign that guy? I just sometimes wonder, it feels from the outside like sometimes those are difficult moves to envision for the Cardinals, and it's why you end up with like Lance Lynn, and you end up with Kyle Gibson, whose wife is from the area and he was wanting to be a Cardinal. And Sonny Gray, I think, had to be, it's not to say he had to be talked into it, but there were a lot of questions that he asked about what's the pitching development like? What's your stance on this? What do you guys have for that? That is a little more forward thinking. And I think the Cardinals have made adjustments as a result of Sonny kind of wanting them in some areas. I can't cite anything specifically, but those were topics of conversations back after the signing and back in spring as well. So I go into this tangent because I think it's relevant. It's all to say that ownership feels maybe complacent to me in the reaction that Bill DeWitt III would have to say, well, it's illogical that Cardinals fans would threaten to not show up to the games because don't they understand that if they don't show up to the games, well, we're not spending on the roster. Payroll's going to go down if they're not going to show up to the games. I've seen it called a threat, a veiled threat to the Cardinal fans, and it may just not even be that deep, which I don't think makes it better, but it's almost like their worldview is out of touch with the way this works. Like it's almost as though, well, we have this Cardinals thing and everybody loves it, so we're born on second base in a position of we're just going to know that they're going to come through the turnstiles because they love the Cardinals, and it almost doesn't matter what we do at a base level. We're still going to have that part of our revenue stream. And it's like he's presented with the notion of the fans not showing up because they're frustrated with the product. It's like, well, that's not part of it. You love the Cardinals. You gotta come. You gotta come to Busch Stadium. I mean, we built this building for you. Come on. What are you doing? But like, that's their attitude almost in the way that these comments come off. And I haven't seen if he's clarified the comments at any point. I saw Jeff Jones did a column on it, Belleville News Democrat, and said in the column that he reached out to Cardinal media relations, and the interview request for a follow-up was declined, which is, whatever it is, that's fine. But that leaves us to kind of have the conversation that we're having and breaking down the comments that we're breaking down, and putting our own kind of interpretation on how we view what was said. Because the organization can spin it in a way that puts it in a favorable light. But to me, like when you say, look, it's illogical to suggest that fans who are frustrated should be able to boycott or should be able to stay away and send that message to ownership like, hey, no, that's exactly the way this works. If you don't show up to the games, that should kind of tip ownership off to, hey, maybe we're doing something wrong. Maybe we shouldn't feel so complacent about, we might love the front office and the coaching staff that we have in place, but maybe we shouldn't just rest on our laurels and say we're the Cardinals, and so we roll out of bed every morning and win 85 games and roll out of bed every morning and hit 3 million through the turnstiles. Maybe that's not the case if we don't do the first part, if we don't win, if we don't play a brand of baseball that people want to come support. They might love the birds on the bat, but they don't have to come to the stadium to still love the birds on the bat. And it doesn't make them any less of a hardcore fan. And again, am I making too much of it? You can let me know and sound off in the comments. But I really just did not agree with the way those comments came off. And maybe Bill DeWitt III would do well to clarify them. Would do well to, even if it's just in the form of a statement and not an interview request that he grants or a formal, a formal conversation, whatever the case might be, on a podcast or in print. Maybe just a statement. I don't think it could necessarily hurt. But also, the way that these things tend to go a lot of the time is, yeah, you make a misstep, you say something wrong. We've all done it. I probably have done it within this very podcast, that if I were as important in the world as Bill DeWitt III is, and he is because he's the team president of the freaking Cardinals, like if I say something and I'm on that level in society and that gets blasted out by media outlets, I probably look stupid after the end of it. But, if a couple hundred people watch this podcast or listen to this podcast and, they say, well, whatever, it doesn't have the same ramifications if I say something stupid. But my point is, we all do it. The route you can go is like clarify and go, you know what? I respect Cardinals fans, understand that they're voicing frustration by not showing up, and it's incumbent upon us to fix it. Not, well, we're owed your attendance, and if you don't give it to us, well, we can't make the team very good. But that sort of seems to be the phrasing of it. And look, I get it. 3 million through the turnstiles is a big part of how the Cardinals make their money, and concessions and merchandise at the stadium and all of that. And it's interesting, at winter warm-up, DeWitt III basically said they're on track to, after the signings that were made in the offseason, fans gave their support and they sold a bunch of tickets. They're on track to get to 3 million again. And in this podcast with Martin, he basically said it's a 50-50 proposition. The over-under that Vegas would set would be at 3 million. Is what Bill DeWitt III said in the podcast, which is to say they're going to be right on that line, but he did not sound nearly as confident, as he was 4 months ago in January, when he was basically saying, yeah, we did it. We're going to be there. We feel pretty good about getting there. And now I think it's more of a 50-50 ball, which is neither here nor there, but it does show maybe that it's working, that he says it's illogical to show that you're not going to show up, but now the confidence level has maybe wavered a little bit in them getting to that 3 million mark that they so very much do value. My prediction is they'll be there one way or another, right? Ticket discounts or give them away so that you can say 3 million. Like, I don't know how it works. We know that it's tickets sold that is announced at the ballpark every night. And I tell you what, the percentage I don't think very often has been close to 100 when it comes to that ticket sold number versus the number I see when I'm there at Busch. Not at every game, but the games I'm at, I'm like, it's a really nice night out. I'm not seeing all these people. They're dressed up as red seats, I guess. I don't know, which is fine. I'm not disparaging the fans when I say that. I'm just saying the more you announce big numbers, because I get it. You probably sold the tickets to corporate and to season ticket holders. And look, if a corporation bought 8 seats for their office and you can give them away or whatever, those seats may go unused at times because maybe you can't put them on somebody's car windshield if the team is below 500 and and going with a 191 batting average with risk, and you can't give them away. You can't make them go through the turnstile. Now, me, if I worked at one of those companies, I'd be there all the time if I were getting offered the free tickets because I love baseball and I love having a beer at the ballpark. Like, that's fun. So that would be the way I would spend my free time if I weren't in the business that I was in. I'd still be going to baseball games. Just what I would be doing. But to say it's illogical for fans to threaten the boycott or try to send a message to ownership about not showing up, I just could not more fervently disagree with that sentiment than I do. Because I think, if nothing else, you find out about the long, heated debate of how much does ownership really want to win versus make sure that the profits are where they need to be. And again, I think I got sidetracked earlier, but I had mentioned that the longstanding view is they're in it for the long haul. The DeWitt family's not selling. But the point I was going to make, and this was probably 25 minutes ago, so I apologize for not closing a loop when I went on a tangent. But the point that I was going to make is that, look, if they ever did go to try to sell this team, it's starting with a B, what they're getting for it, right? They didn't pay for the B. The B did materialized over the years, right? It grew because it is a profitable business. They paid, however, $150 million or whatever, and half of it was parking garages that they sold right away to recoup their cash. They are in a profitable business. A bad season, to me, should not be licensure to go, well, we have to cut back on the payroll. And in their defense, they didn't. They raised it to 180, 185 million, whatever it is. They didn't raise it maybe as much as you out there in Cardinals land wanted them to, but they're not skimping. Part of it, though, is, are they spending their money effectively? I would make the case that $16 million for Miles Michaelis, not effective way to spend some money this year. His ERA is 6.19. I like Miles Michaelis, but look, that's not bringing home the bacon. Can make a case that $2 million for Brandon Crawford, a much smaller contract, but is that effective use of it? Look, they valued needing to have that insurance policy in case Mason Wynn's back acted up. I get it. But who's to say that you couldn't have just called up? Like, the Cardinals almost are so reluctant to do anything that could be conceived as, a little bit outside the bounds that other teams would go, well, let's try it. Let's see if it can work. And they're just so reluctant to do it. To just say, hey, Brendan Donovan's going to play shortstop. I mean, the Dodgers of all teams said Mookie Betts is going to play shortstop. Now, he's elite. He's the best athlete in baseball, in my opinion. He can play anywhere. He could do anything. He could bowl a 300 game. He's great. So it's a little bit different maybe than saying, but Brendan Donovan did win an award, a Gold Glove award, for his ability to be a utility defender. So those are the types of things that, like, rather than take up a roster spot for a player that is maybe on the wrong side of 35 or however old he is in Brandon Crawford, and maybe we saw the skills diminish and decline last year, you could chalk it up to injury. Like I said, in the moment, it wasn't easy to say, oh, this Brandon Crawford signing, I don't know about it. Look, we had our skepticisms, but we're also inclined to say, hey, look, they're going to give this guy a shot. He's a proven veteran. He's been a winner. Okay, let's see how it pans out. Well, I mean, so far, it's just not been too enthralling. He's made a couple plays here and there, but the batting average is low, and largely his defensive range has not been up to, passing the test. And so you're like, well, man, it's the opportunity cost of being able to find out if a younger player can establish himself. And then when you do that over and over and over and have that be your organizational philosophy, rather than giving a young guy a shot, which, look, they did it with Victor Scott, but they almost had to because they lost their top three or two or three options. Really three. Lars Nootbaar was injured at the beginning of the year. Tommy Edman didn't come back like they hoped he would, and then Dylan Carlson got hurt. That's the only, it's like as a last resort. And obviously it did not work out with Victor Scott, so I'm not necessarily saying that the Cardinals were wrong to try and avoid prematurely using Victor Scott, but it's the sentiment of it's predictable. It's predictable when the Cardinals are going to have to finally make the bold move versus are they choosing to do it because they're ahead of the circumstances. They're dealing from a position of strength rather than on their heels and just reacting to things as they come and then dragging their heels and then finally reacting to it because they no longer can avoid putting off making a dang decision. I feel like that's the exact position that they've been in over the past few weeks with Matthew Liberatore taking the Steven Matz spot. Every time it comes up, they don't want to. Game notes listed him for Sunday, so I guess he's going to pitch Sunday unless I hear different at some point. But that's like the situation that I feel like really personifies what's going on with the Cardinals, where they're just so reluctant to make decisions. And I've seen that mentioned out there in social media land, and I actually wholeheartedly agree with it. It's been a marker of this front office the last couple of years to me. But when you have an ownership group that is going to unwaveringly support you regardless of those trends, and their view is that it's illogical for fans to demand better, essentially, or you'll be threatened with a lower payroll for the team that you love. That's not a great look. That's not a great look. I want to continue to, before we get out of here, play a little bit more of the Bill DeWitt comments, because I did. I cut it off, and then I sort of went on my roll because I didn't want to get too deep into his comments before recognizing that maybe there was something wrong with him. And I wanted to talk about him. But I'm gonna scroll it back to about the beginning of his comment, where you'll hear the talk of illogical one more time, and then I'll let that full answer play before we get out of here.
The thing I chuckle about is when I see sometimes comments, we gotta, not show up to send a message that this isn't acceptable to the owners. I find that one somewhat illogical reasoning, because, we just turn this revenue machine into a payroll machine. I mean, that's what this is, this business. I mean, we try to drive as much revenue as we can, and then it gets put on the field for the most part. We have to obviously put on all sorts of other expenses. We talked about the stadium earlier and all kinds of other things. But you know what I'm getting at is we take those, we try to, and it. I'll just give you another way of saying the same thing. If you look at the revenue rankings in MLB, for the most part, with a few rare exceptions, your ranking in revenue translates into your ranking in payroll. And, that's been true of the Cardinals, for many, many years. And, we have been sort of around the 10th out of 30th, plus or minus, 8, 9, 10, 11. And that's where our payroll's been. And so you kind of, it matches for a reason. And so we try to drive additional revenue in every way that we can so that we can climb the rankings of the payroll, because we know that there's a correlation between payroll and winning, not direct. We also have to, and there are low market teams that have performed very well. And it depends on where you are in the cycle of competing, right? We don't want to have to tank for 5 years to get good draft picks and do it the way, the Astros did it or the Cubs did it or whomever. We'd like to be competitive every year. We've shown that can work if we make good decisions.
All right, next,
and go from there.
And I'm sorry, I thought you were done. I was going to say next time we'll do the deep dive on the TV, which is a whole nother. That's like a 3-hour conversation. That's something that also ties into the revenue, which I know you guys are hoping maybe at the end of this year or going into next year you'll have some sort of rollout or at least a new plan for that.
Yeah, that's a big topic because there's a lot of disruption going on, and we're sort of right in the middle of all that because we're one of the Bally's teams. The parent of Bally's, Diamond Sports, is in bankruptcy, and we're watching that very closely because it could affect our TV rights revenue, and basically it could affect where we are in that ranking.
So I'm going to stop it right there. Again, you want to check out scoopswithdannymac.com, the full podcast, Kilcoyne Conversation between Martin Kilcoyne and Bill DeWitt III. Here's what I would say. I included that TV element stuff at the end because when we talk about $3 million through the turnstiles and sending a message to the ownership and how that they consider that to be illogical thinking, because basically in their mind, payroll is going to reflect the revenue ranking. Payroll ranking and revenue ranking should coincide. And we don't really know necessarily what the exacts are. I still maintain that it's difficult to anybody who says, "Oh, I know what it is because I looked at SpoTrack," and it's like, well, they don't really necessarily have the full accounting, and there might be a place that does. I know Fangraphs does probably the best job of it in terms of having the payroll stuff, but what nobody has is the revenue because it's not public, so they can say it's one thing. Forbes always does their different valuations, and it's not necessarily a perfect system, but I do think it's better than no system, and so I don't mind when otherwise we're just like feeling our way through the dark. They come up with something that looks like it could be pretty useful, and people want to utilize it and form opinions off of it. I actually understand that. I'm good with that. But Cardinals, according to FanGraphs, are ranked 11th in payroll, and the 10 in front of them all have 200 million plus projected 2024 payrolls. But then there's like the luxury tax payroll, and there's the guaranteed money, and then it's just like for me, I hate to get too much into the weeds on it because there could be things that I'm missing, so I never want to be too definitive on saying here's what it is. But if you look at the luxury tax payroll, the Cardinals are actually like 14th, and maybe even a little bit below that, 14th, 15th, with all of those aspects that go into it. So basically, for the Cardinals, I get it, they're a smaller market, but that just doesn't count because they are the Cardinals, and they have been a revenue-producing machine. Cardinals fans support like none other. I wanted to bring the TV part up, or at least allow Bill DeWitt to mention it, because it is an impact, and it is something that they do have to be thinking about, because I think more of their money does come from the TV stuff than it would the in-stadium stuff. I don't know the breakdown of that, but we know that it's substantial. The TV contract stuff is substantial in how they make their revenue, which furthers my point of, well, how can you almost threaten and say, well, if you don't show up, we're not going to be able to do as much on the payroll stuff, because you're still going to be getting revenue from the other stuff that you do, especially TV. And if the Cardinals play their cards right, even if the Bally stuff goes under, they end up putting together their own subscription or whatever they do with their rights if they win them back or they get them back if Bally goes under. They're going to have revenue streams. There's no doubt about it. And Bill DeWitt III has been working on this over the past few years just in case they need to run their own broadcast. I think they'll be able to do it and do it in a way that makes them money, because they'll be able to do even better by tapping into the larger geographic fan base where the Cardinals fans live than just the folks who can get them on cable in the greater St. Louis area, because it's an antiquated system that's currently used, and half the cable providers can't even access Bally anyway because there's not an agreement. I think the Cardinals are going to be in almost better shape if it gets resolved in that way. Maybe not right away, but eventually in the long haul from the TV stuff. But that's just to say, don't threaten the fans on we're going to have a lower payroll if you don't show up, because you're going to make just a good bundle of money on the other stuff you do too. The revenue is going to be okay. And I think with the way that the fans have supported this organization over the long haul, the fans are almost, if anybody's owed anything here, it's not that Cardinals fans owe it to the team to keep showing up despite a bad product, if the product continues to be bad, that is. But I think it's almost the other way around, that the organization owes it to fans to say, hey, you've seen us through thick and thin, and we've given you a lot of thick, or is it thin? Whichever one's better. We've given you a lot of good times. Now we're on some bad times. Look, you've given us a lot as well, allowing us to have those good times. So we're going to continue to feed this back into the organization, not threaten the moment you decide to say that you don't like the product because it's losing a bunch. Well, nobody likes a losing team. So that's just the way anybody would react. So anyway, those are the comments by Bill DeWitt III. Again, check it out, the Kilcoyne Conversation with Martin Kilcoyne. Interviewed him at length, scoopswithdannymac.com. Those are my thoughts. Let me know what you think, Cardinals fans, in the comments below. I lied again. This episode did end up going over an hour because there was a lot to get to. So that's going to do it. Eventually, we do end the show. That's going to do it for this edition of the show. Check out the YouTube membership if you want to. Cool subscription. It'll be in the link to the description, et cetera, et cetera. But that's going to do it for this edition of the show. Appreciate you guys, as always. And we'll talk to you next time on B-Schaeff Daily. Peace.